Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thanks for joining us in episode number 35. You had a rocking video from Tommy, who made that whole um, episode ablaze, I would say the least, with his nuggets of wisdom and practicality of how business relationship managers can make a difference to business partners worldwide. So we are continuing this episode. Thank you so much, Tommy, for joining us in the episode number 35. We're getting deeper into that part. And we're going to talk about some hard truths, some things we don't want to like to talk about. But I think it's a reality that when we get into rolling up our sleeves as business relationship managers and getting into the trenches, you will be upstruck by a lot of people. So let's start about overcoming resistance. And I think the part of overcoming resistance and partner engagement is that how do you deal with partners that would rather go around the BRM team work within the organization? Like there are a lot of naysayers in an organization, whether you like it or not, there are people. So how do you deal with them? What are the ways that you can get along on board? Should we even get them along the board or say we should ignore them? Because not everybody is upbeat about BRM. You are a passionate BRM. That doesn't mean that everybody is upbeat about it. I mean, we have so much other things. It doesn't work. We tried this one, it didn't work. So how do you deal with naysayers in reality?
I think you have to be realistic. I think you have to take a good. The first step is realizing where you are.
Right.
Not just you personally, and as BRMs, sometimes we do take that personally. That hey, I'm having a hard time breaking through in a certain part of the company, and
Right.
it could be internally within if you're centered in an IT organization.
Right.
It could be that you're having a hard time, connecting inside. That people are trying to figure out, like, who are you and what do you do here, and why should I spend my time with you? Because I have a calendar that's every 30 minutes booked up solid all day long.
Sure.
Can you tell me in 5 minutes or less what a BRM is and how you're going to help me?
Right.
If you don't have that nailed down, then you probably don't want to write that down and maybe practice it in the mirror a few times.
Correct.
So I think the first part is like, nailing the introduction. Who am I? Why am I here? And what can I do to help you?
Right.
And not ask them. Tell them, this
Correct.
is where I'm good. This is where I am strong. I can help you do these things very well.
Right.
Um, I'm not here to solve all your problems. Make sure
Right.
you tell them what you're not here to do.
Correct.
You are not the person to call when someone's WebEx is a little laggy today, or the person who, hey, I was trying to get a new computer for my new employee.
Right.
I educate. So part of being the face of IT to a big part of your business organization is allowing yourself to educate people. So know the
Right.
business of IT, connect those folks with the right processes. Like, hey, it's really simple. And if you have an emerging issue, we have this chat function. I'll drop you the link and kind of let you go do that. Let me know if that doesn't work for you, and I can definitely connect you with someone else.
Sure.
So I think that's the first key, right? If you want to win over the naysayers, you have to really focus on where you're strong. You mentioned a little bit about engagement. I do think that engagement was a big lesson learned for me.
Hmm.
When I looked at our organization, the organization I support is 3,000 plus strong.
Hmm.
It is the fastest growing business unit in our company with
Right.
a huge strategic impact. You can attempt to talk to all those leaders, but you're just going to fill up your calendar with a whole bunch of stuff. And after about 2 or 3 meetings, no one's really feeling like this is going anywhere.
Right.
So I do think, and this is a lesson learned as I was looking at how to plan 2025. I started to look at, like, what are the business outcomes that our company's trying to achieve? Who are the leaders that are really pivotal to making that happen? And where would IT be able to make a difference there? I
Right.
think that's the key, right? Is not trying to, like, be everything to everyone. Go to where the problems are, go to
Right.
where the opportunities are, and then figure out how to add value. Find out where they're frustrated. Find out, where they maybe have a gap in knowledge or understanding, and help them achieve, framing up what it is they're trying to get done. Because sometimes people don't know how to ask,
Right.
and that could be a key strength of yours, is to be able to say, hey, I have an ability to hear about a business problem, simplify it so that I can go back and explain it to people who are really smart in technology.
Right.
And then in turn, when the really smart people in technology are able to solution it and come up with an estimate and tell you those kinds of things, I'm able to go back and say, hey, I talked with my partners. This is what we came up with. We've got 3 different options here. varying degrees of risk and cost and time. What works best up front? And then now we're in a good conversation now.
Right.
And we could achieve this business outcome with some short-term things in our agility bucket, for instance, to help get you past some of the things you're stuck on in the near term. Here's some of the things that we can do in the longer term that take a business case. They take some sponsorship from the business, sponsorship from, say, your CFO,
Right.
Your CIO, your IT leadership, your VPs and others who own those technology stacks. And then now you're really trying to connect people. And notice I didn't get into like, well, let's start talking about your use cases and let's dive in and start writing user stories or architectural diagrams. I didn't bring that to them. I know how to do those things,
Right.
but it's not the right time and not the right audience. So
Right.
if you want to turn your naysayers over, you got to be enthusiastic first. You have to show up excited about what you do. If you show up flat, you get flat back, right? And you know, there are plenty of meetings that they're not excited about.
Right.
They should look forward to that time with you. And I do look forward to those business partners that kind of have that look like, wow, I'm so glad we're getting to talk. This is such a different conversation than the ones I have all day.
Right. Right.
And I think that's where you start establishing your brand, that I'm a person who helps, you know, turn the fire down. Let's be calm. Let's, you know, kind of sort through what the real issues are here. Then let me go back and partner with my partners that I've built relationships with inside IT. And let's go get some of these things done together. Right. And notice I said together. It's not about like going away in your silo or your secret lab and coming up with all these really high-tech solutions to something. It's how do you bring those folks together, right, to start to see that, hey, if we can talk the language of the business and we can understand what they're trying to get done, right, then if you can talk the language of technology to make that make sense to technical people, right, then we can really start building some momentum and getting those wins. And it might be small. It might be just clearing up a major blocking issue that they have in a business process. Right. It could be that you're helping them understand what their options are. What can we do? I don't know. I'm frustrated. I've tried to ask this question a million times. No one seems to know. Right. Help them, you know, provide clarity. And I think the naysayer thing, I can tell you, I've had stakeholders, they're, you know, partners that I've looked at across the screen for the first time, and we both had a blank look at our face, like, how's this going to work? Right? Because they're new, you're new to the relationship. Maybe it's somebody you haven't worked with before. You know, I would tell you a key thing is to connect. You know, during that quiet time, maybe before you're getting ready to kind of get down to business, you know, be personable, be someone they want to talk to, be excited about what you do. Also share. And, you know, I like to also know what's important to them, because they're a person. They're not just somebody on an org chart somewhere or somebody you can look up real quick in your contacts. Right. They're a person that has their own goals this year, that they're being judged on, graded on, their bonus is counting on it. Figure out what their motivations are. Figure out what they're frustrated about. And then finally, I think you have to, I like to use an acronym called FORD. And I got this from a previous mentor of mine. You know, family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. If you can start to learn some of those things about, hey, this is important to them, then you find a way to connect. And it could be like, hey, I can only meet for like 25 minutes a day because my kid has a soccer game today. The next time you meet, that's in your head. Hey, how'd the soccer game go? And it's not being fake. And please don't take it that way. But like, people like to connect on a human level first. Right. And if I can connect to you as a person and you start to understand who I am and what my goals are, what I'm trying to find, I typically find we have some common ground. Right. And it's really, it's a lot easier to work with people you like. Correct. You know, so be likable, be someone that's approachable. And then finally, you know, get past that, you know, and those are sort of foundational things, but you got to start delivering value, or else the conversations, their calendar gets full and you're triple booked and now the BRM is out. So I would say, you know, do those things really well up front. And if you're not doing those things now, reset. Hey, I think I missed a few steps. Be honest and humble about it. Right. Like, I really think we're not connecting well. Can I talk to you about why that is? And have hard conversations. You know, it's not easy to have these conversations, but it's not easy when you get 6 months down the road and you're not even talking anymore. Sure. And that can happen in a business relationship just as it does in personal ones, that if you don't invest and spend the time and ask those hard questions and be willing to take feedback, then you're probably going to stay where you were, or even worse, you might even take a step or two back in the relationship, you know, in that way.
Absolutely. I love the part of the four that you talked about in terms of family, occupation, recreation, and their dreams. And it's very important that we think about it as a part of doing it genuinely without being interested, more personable. That's one. The second one is, as you said, being more adding value. I know a lot of people tack and say that I had a business meeting with my partners, tick on the box. So they kind of look at calendarizing this whole part and says if you don't add value into that particular conversation, they're not going to be interested to give you a slot anymore. And then they're just going to go and move on, right? So it's kind of asking this question, are you convinced that you did the right homework? And I tell people as BRMs, you need to do your homework before you go to any meeting for that matter. Your preparation is important. But also that you give them an extra aha moment in terms of resources, in terms of capability, in terms of help, that they find it much more valuable. And you really mentioned that some of the business partners look forward to the meeting with Tommy because, well, this is a great strategic conversation. I'm excited about what we're going to do it together. So that's the kind of the thing. It's also about how you exude confidence, how you exude enthusiasm that they see, hey, you know what? It rubs over the other person's shoulder as well that they feel good about it, all listening to what you're talking about and seeing how we can make that really impactful. Now, that comes to the next point in terms of business partners. Everyone has their pet project. They want to have that as being, this is what I wanted, get this done. But within IT and within the whole chain, you have so much projects coming around. There's conflicting priorities, and each and every stakeholder is just having vested interest on their outcomes to do it. So, how do you handle conflicting priorities? I mean, you cannot be a good cop and a bad cop to someone else. You still have to be the right person to give everybody a fair opportunity to deliver what has been asked to deliver. But it's so tough. There's so much coming on in terms of things. You only have limited time to how do you manage conflicting priorities?
I think it's it depends, right? The classic
Right,
kind of asterisk next to any answer. In our organization, the BRM is not the decision maker,
right,
which kind of is a bit liberating, and it puts the BRM in a position to be an objective partner.
right,
Uh, that doesn't mean we don't say no
right,
when that's the right answer, or
right,
later is a better way to put it. I will just tell you that I want to put my business partners in the best position to present their opportunity
hmm,
to get it on the board.
right,
So on the board could be this year, next year, the next year, because it could be some longer term thing.
right,
And it mentioned in an earlier episode and earlier today about there's some things we can do short term.
right,
So instead of that big bang, what are some opportunities? Oh, the real problem is about the data. And if we could just surface this and put it somewhere, that our folks can get to it, they can make better business decisions. Okay. Well, this is not a new platform, and it's certainly not, an entirely new business process that would incorporate a lot of change across the business. But let's do these things first.
right,
But I do think helping to bring knowledge and exposure. So, for instance, one of the things I like to do when someone's talking about a business problem and I determine there's a gap, bring the market research.
right,
Use sources like Gartner or Infotech or your own research, and come back to them with some real nuggets, some
right,
things that other companies in your space are doing, or perhaps something that has been working that maybe your company just never got to. It got backlogged, it never got supported, because there were other pressing business needs. But I do think you need to bring something to the table.
right.
If you want them to get on board and you want them to really understand why their project's number 5 and the above the line with 4 and above, then help them understand, like, how do I better write a business case? How do I better describe the problem that we're having, the impact to the business's success? And then finally, what are the options, and be able to present those options in a way that makes sense to a pretty large group of decision makers. Because when you're talking about anything sizable, money, time, and people typically are kind of some of the constraints you face, like right up front before you get started. People never have enough time, never have enough people, and they certainly are competing
Right.
for some of those same critical resources. Some
Yep.
of your IT teams may have 5 people on it that support a platform,
Correct.
and doing something entirely net new is a huge ask, and
Right.
it's going to require some sacrifice that perhaps, hey, remember all those quick things you wanted? In order to do that big thing, I'm going to have you feel a little bit of pain up front. Like we're
Right.
going to put those things off so we can focus on this one big thing you wanted to do, or
Right.
vice versa. Hey, let's put that on for next year. What are some things I can do for you immediately? Put them
Right.
in the hopper. Let's create a Jira ticket, give it to that delivery team, let them, analyze it, and then let's commit. I'm going to
Right.
give you this by X. And finally, like I said, I'm not telling them no at that point. I'm
Right.
helping them understand how we make decisions. I'm
Right.
helping them understand how to better prepare for those decisions. And then finally, when that decision's made, we help everyone understand why we made it. Let's be transparent here.
Correct.
These are the organization's top X, things that a pretty wide variety of people in our governance type roles, those leaders are making those decisions, not the BRM, at least in our case.
Awesome. So let's step gears in towards measurement and success. Every BRM is interested to look at what's your performance goal look like. How do you measure success? So it's sometimes how do you measure the levels of success within the BRM, right? I mean, beyond traditional KPIs, how do we really tell? Because a lot more things is difficult. You said that they're not decision makers. You're only kind of being part of the journey. We are orchestrating things, but there's a lot of moving parts. It is not under your control. So in reality, how do you measure a business relationship manager's effort towards success? Because I tell people that, well, you can put all your efforts into it, but if the results don't show up, I don't really care about it, right? So it's a kind of a ruthless world where they really want to see that impactful results. So with that said in mind, how do you think that BRMs are evaluated from the success quotient?
Well, I will tell you, using your equation, effort does not equal success.
Right.
I mean, if you were,
Absolutely.
it is a lot of effort, particularly at a couple key points. A, when you're just getting started, you're trying to establish yourself not just as a function, BRM, which may be entirely net new to your organization. You're trying to establish yourself as someone they can trust,
Right.
as someone that's going to like help them get their goals accomplished.
Right.
So I would tell you, if you're measuring success, it looks different at different times in your BRM journey. So, for instance, up front, are they even willing to meet with you? Right? They're very busy. I don't find a lot of calendars with white space on them nowadays. People have a lot going on. The second part is are you involved? And what I mean by that is there are all kinds of strategic conversations going on about
Right.
what the business needs to achieve this year, this quarter, this week, this month. Are you in the room? Or have you been invited? Have you earned a spot to come and learn? Because if you're talking right up front, you're probably going to step on your own toes.
Right.
Uh, and you should be listening. I will tell you, listen intently, ask the right questions at the right time. So, for
Right.
instance, if you're just newly, and I'll give you an example, over the last several months, I've been invited in some different conversations with my business partner. And I'm very aware that I am not like the rest of the people in this meeting. I do not belong to their organization.
Right.
From a title perspective, there's sometimes a power distance there.
Right.
It could range from someone who's a director all the way to someone who's the COO in some of these conversations. So understanding where you are and why you're there is important, but also asking good questions when appropriate.
Right.
Sometimes you're listening and you're collecting and you're synthesizing, but then you should, if you're there and you're actually listening with intent to help them to figure out what their real problems are, connect, outcomes to opportunities, then you should be thinking about the next one-on-one you have. And you talked about preparation. So this is where that comes full circle. You've been invited. You're not just, halfway listening in on a call while doing something else. You're intent on understanding, like, what's the real business problem they're trying to solve here. You're thinking, there's probably 3 or 4 questions I want to ask, but I'm not going to interrupt this vice president who's in the middle of a presentation to ask this really IT type question, right? You're not trying to do that. But what I do is the next time or even afterwards, hey, do you have a minute? I'd like to ask you a couple questions kind of offline related to some of the topics here. Here's what I had, a list of, 1 to 3 things.
Right.
And then take that back and ask, hey, if I heard this correctly, really where the problem or the opportunity might lie is here. Would you agree? And notice I'm asking these kind of active listening questions. I'm repeating back what I thought I heard. I'm adding a little bit of some thought to that, like
Right.
what I know and how I could apply that. And then I'm also asking, like, is this something you want me to go do? Do I need to carry that flag on your behalf, or is this just informational at this point? And
Correct.
sometimes you might sit, like I did, through several meetings and never heard anything about IT.
Hmm.
And I was like, wow, I wonder if this meeting is adding any value. What I didn't realize, what a leader came to realize, I was learning about the business. That's
Right.
why I was there. I wasn't there to interrupt the call or
No.
ask a bunch of questions. I was there to learn. And by learning, you need to apply it. And then finally, you need to go do something with it. You have to go find a way to solve their problems. And it's not, an I exercise, it's a we, it's a team.
Correct.
And going back and getting that perspective from service delivery teams, from your IT leaders who may be in some different conversations with those leaders and understand a bit more context.
Right.
So I may share something that says, hey, I was in this leadership call and they talked about ABC, and I go back and talk to an IT leader and I'm like, hey, let me add a little bit of some of the backstory on that to help you understand the
Correct.
context of what they're asking for. Okay, so if all that's true, what are your thoughts? Here's what I'm thinking. And
Right.
now we're starting to have a real conversation, not just in the business, but back with my AT partners who at that VP level, they're having conversations.
Right.
They're having different engagements. So how do I put all that together? So that's where I think the real value is you've got to be able to, be present, take something away from it, but then apply it. Like you got to do something with it. If you're just going to meetings to go to meetings, then you probably need to relook your calendar and decide, should I be there? Is this adding, any kind of value to me? And in this case, it was, even though it seemed like fruitless at first,
Sure.
I learned a lot about what their problems were. I learned a lot about, what they were proud of, the things
Correct.
that were working. And then
Correct.
finally, I learned, where can I add an impact? And in this case, and you mentioned, the question prior about intake and prioritization.
Right.
I've spent the past couple of months on doing nothing but that.
Hmm.
And it's helping folks clarify the business outcome, look at potential solutions with my partners, bring those ideas back, create business cases, align the work in a logical sequence that aligns with their needs, and then finally just communicate, communicate, communicate.
Yep.
So we know
Absolutely.
what's working, what's not.
Yep. Awesome. So, tell me about a major failure or a challenge and how your team recovered from it. Because a lot of times, um, I tell those are episodes which has been very difficult for people to swallow, and it's testing times. So in those moments, how do you recover back? How do you build that resilience? How do you come back when it comes to a failure? So can you share some perspectives on a major failure or challenge on how your team recovered from it?
It's interesting. We started out, with a team of one. We brought on additional BRMs. There's two. A recent one that I can think of is, there's a need for us to educate our own IT teams.
Hmm.
And I look back and go, gosh, why are we struggling so much with role conflict inside our own team?
Hmm.
Like I have business partners who are like, oh, okay, this is what you do. Here's how I engage with you. They still have these relationships with other IT leaders. So we weren't replacing anyone. We were adding a focus on relationships. But sometimes that leads to a little bit of you know, confusion, even
Hmm.
within your organization. And I'd say, in particular, our IT leaders are really strong. I mean, you're talking folks with 25, 30 years of experience. They have a lot of depth and a lot of knowledge, but they only have the same 24 hours that we do.
Correct.
So it is trying to find like where they start and we start and how those things kind of overlay like a Venn. And then how do you work well together? So, when I look at, where we are in our journey, we really want to focus a bit more on our IT relationships this year, because the thing that we're noticing is we're operating differently,
Right.
very differently. So remember, we talked about, how we started out thinking about areas where we needed to be consistent and where there was a need for tailoring how a BRM approaches, building relationships, adding impact and such. what I find is that we're kind of struggling, in this kind of second year with, okay, we've gotten past the easy stuff. Now
Yeah.
we're getting into some areas where I like to call it rubbing elbows a bit, like we're
Right.
bumping into each other.
Yep. Yep.
And I think what you have to do there is you have to have some really good conversations with your leadership team that says like, hey, where do you see opportunities? Where are there areas where maybe we're falling short? Are there areas where maybe we're overstepping and kind of getting into your lane a little bit? And let's be clear about that. I can tell you it's not for lack of trying. We did a Roski. We
Right.
started with a Roski, right? And we used the BRM kind of term. I talked a bit earlier about how things we have to optimize them. Roski did not go well with us. We were not at that point. We
Right.
use Racy and Roski depending on
Right.
which part of the business you're in. But I think one of the things we're going to do here in a future offsite is we're actually going to talk to our IT leaders and get feedback. Where are we struggling? Where have you seen, some pain, or maybe there's some little bit of, I don't want to let go of that because I don't quite think you guys are ready for that yet as BRMs, because you're talking with experienced people. They know how to get things done. They've been doing it for a long time. And now you've got this new role that you're trying to, it's a puzzle piece, right? And sometimes we're actually carving out a piece of the puzzle. Like we are finding a spot for this piece and where it best fits.
Right.
And I think the different work styles, the personalities, the way teams are organized can sometimes create a challenge for BRMs within their own IT community. And that's not
Right.
to say that people aren't trying to support BRM. It's not to say that, BRMs are intentionally causing, conflict. But sometimes when you're doing something very new like BRM, you have to be aware. You have to really say like, oh, wow, I haven't talked to this person in a while. I wonder why. Or, hey, I got surprised. There was something that happened in a part of the organization that normally we would have talked about, but we somehow didn't, connect.
Yeah.
Why is that? Hey, are we kind of going the wrong way? Let's refocus. Where am I, where are some opportunities that I can take? Because I think you have to be reflective. You have to ask and be ready to receive feedback. I always, one of the things, it's easy to say like, hey, I'd like some feedback, but do you? Do you really? I mean, are you ready to hear that like, hey, I'm not happy with the way that you handled this, or I'm not happy with, you strayed into this area that's clearly not a BRM thing. And you might have had the best of intentions, but I do think that, feedback is important. And part of having that feedback is the ability to absorb it, but also to reflect on it and do something different. And if you're not willing to do that, then I think you could continue to see struggles. So that's sort of an area where I'm working on, personally. Our team is also looking at, how we can do this better. But I think it's an area all BRMs and an IT organization can run into, particularly when you have a very strong leadership team like we do.
Sure. Our last final two questions to kind of close loop this whole part. If it was a new BRM who's coming on board, and if you want to talk to your younger self 2 years back, if someone was getting into BRM, what would you advise when you start a BRM? Well, now with this experience that you've gone through this whole roller coaster ride for the last 2 years and beyond, what do you think you would advise for someone newly coming in with a lot of interest and enthusiasm, hoping some magic would happen in this BRM world? What would you advise to the younger self?
You're so eager when you're new to anything, right? Whether it's a new role, new company, new business partner. I think the first thing is to be realistic. We're all looking to make a splash when we first get somewhere, but in doing that, sometimes we can miss a few of the kind of foundational things. So, I would say, know the business, dive in there. Like if you're a BRM, you need to understand how your company makes money.
Right.
You need to understand where the risks are. How does Wall Street view your company? Where do the analysts see there might be problems? This is insight.
Right.
You need to understand your product. What is it that you sell of value that customers are willing to pay for? And how does that work, from a delivery perspective? Because there's a lot of moving pieces, as you know. But I think having that like business acumen is critical. I would say that the second part is spend time in the business. So I call it the business of IT, right? So understand how your service delivery teams work, understand your PMO processes, understand the people within those teams, and start building relationships before you need them. Right. I'm sure you've probably faced this too. the inopportune time to meet someone is when you need something from them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's best to have a good foundation, right? So,
Right.
have a list. One of the things we did early on was we built a in processing type checklist for BRMs,
Hmm.
and it's tailored. It's a template at first, but it talks about, week 1 through 4. What are the things you need to know? All the information is right there at your fingertips. What's the mission, vision of the company, the strategy, what products, how do you get product type information? Because you don't have, 80 hours to sit down and, take a brain dump and give someone something. So it is a
Sure.
combination of like connection points and also connection to resources. But I would say know the business, spend time in the business. I think I mentioned that. Uh, I call them ride alongs. I went and spent time in our network operations center, like with people who were dealing with real issues from our external customers to understand how they were using our systems, where they were struggling, where things were working really well so we don't break that later,
Right.
trying to do something new. And then finally, I would tell them to my younger my younger BRM self just 2 years ago to slow down.
Hmm.
We have this like need as a BRM to go fast and to
Hmm.
deliver value and get after something right away. And in doing that, sometimes we can get ahead of our skis a little bit. You can get ahead of where the business is or where IT is, or even worse, where your BRM capability is. So, for instance, if you're out trying to push value plans and you're not even part of the process, people are like, that's just extra work.
Hmm.
Like, I already have a business case. Is that something different? And now you kind of put something out there a little before it was people were ready for that. So I would say you really have to look at like the maturity of the business partners organization to, operate in a new way with BRM as a key component of that,
Right.
the IT organization as well. And then finally, your BRM team. Do you have the foundational pieces in place? Whether it's education through some of our certifications, whether it's, really just structure. How do we operate as a BRM team? How do we share information? How do we deliver where we are in the BRM maturity kind of
Sure.
continuum? And then from there, I think you continue to refine, bump your head, learn from it, bump your head, learn from it, and just know that, like, moving from what someone might consider a failure, it does require a lot of personal fortitude, because you're gonna there's so many days you probably hate this job. You'll be really
Yeah, yeah.
frustrated despite all your effort and how hard you tried, and it just wasn't received well, or it didn't work out the way you planned. I do think you have to, learn to take your hits and get back up with that same level of enthusiasm, and get back after it tomorrow, and, not let that kind of set you back permanently. It's just, what happened? What can I learn from it? And what am I going to do differently to keep that from happening again?
Yeah.
And I think that's a key.
Absolutely. And the final question would be, what do you think is the future of BRM, right? I mean, predicting the future, what changes are going to change? Um, is BRMs with AI, particularly AI coming into picture, do we still have this role of BRM? Are we going to look at more on automation? What's the future look like? Everybody is looking at predicting like Nostradamus and say, hey, what's the future going to be, a few years down the line? But what do you think coming, Tommy, with BRM and the changes and the future look like?
I think I'd like to see a bit more around the career path of a BRM being not just formalized, but maybe a little transparent.
Hmm.
One of the key things I learned at the conference this year was how many people said, I've only been a BRM for 2 years, but I've done BRM stuff for 20.
Right.
And what I find is some of us came from a BSA background, some came from a business background, some came from an IT, like more of a, application development background. I would like to see us branch out a bit, and not just put the BRM in a static bucket.
Right.
As I look around me, I see BSAs that are really promising.
Hmm.
They're great at technical. They can hear a problem and draw it out and help people understand it. Wouldn't it be great if those BSAs, or your business analysts, understood BRM better?
Hmm.
That they could have better engagements with the folks that they interact with daily?
Right.
What about your PMs? Would your PMs understand a bit more about how to deliver value in their projects if they
Right.
understood how those decisions are made, and when a change request came in, how that might impact the outcome of the project? Like, hey, we're behind on QA. So we're going to take an additional 6 weeks of, testing time. And that's an ask of this many more dollars and this much more time. And oh, guess what? Now this project got pushed back past when we needed to start it. So it actually is delayed a year now because we do all these accounting things at a certain part of the year. And, helping folks understand that BRM is not just a static role, that it needs to evolve. I
Right.
think if we're still doing the same thing in 5 years that we're doing today, BRM won't exist. It will be absorbed into whatever's delivering value. So I think we have to continue to leverage tools like AI. I like to call it more dancing with the machine. How does a BRM use AI to enhance business outcomes? How does the BRM introduce parts of the business that might be resistant to AI to some smaller pilot programs that could help them solve business problems? And I think it's not just leading with this technology, it's leading with, using my relationship with a business partner to better understand their problems, their opportunities, so that we can deliver on it. And I think if you're doing that, whether you call it BRM or not, we'll continue to be successful.
Awesome. I think this has been a great episode. Once again, a lot of wisdom got cut through around in all different format. Thank you so much, Tommy. And for people just listening and saying, what do you need to do next? I would suggest that you be part of the BRM world too. That's a lot more happening around globally, in this part of the world. So, Tommy, when is that happening in your side of the world? In terms of the BRM World Tour, what's the plan look like? And there's a lot more excitement, but if you can give us quick note about what people can expect by attending the tour or being a part of the community, what do they stand to gain?
Yeah, I'll start with the community. At least in the BRM US South community, we meet quarterly. There are also some smaller engagements in the Atlanta area as well as the Texas Triangle. Reach out to me and I could definitely connect you. And definitely, if you're on the BRM Institute's website, there's a very robust section on communities and how to engage. There are areas that are functional. There are areas that are more of industry. And then there are finally, if you're technical, there's definitely BRM tools, new to BRM. There's a lot of great places to engage. I would also say don't ignore the knowledge partner piece I talked about in the previous episode. If you don't know who our providers are, knowledge partners are, go out to the website. You'll see them there. They are the voices of a lot of knowledge. They deal with different companies that are in different places in their BRM journey. And sometimes you may find that, you don't have to pay them a, big fee. They'll share some of these little nuggets with you in conversations, and they'll come visit your executive team and do the BRM executive overview and let, that team understand better. Sign up for their brown bag series, and sign up for their newsletters and look at their books. Many of the BRM Institute active members are writing books about BRM. They're writing blog posts. So I would say be a student of the game. Go out and learn who's who and who's, making some great moves and sharing, very good pieces of wisdom, and then connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tommy, for your time today. And I hope everyone enjoyed this episode of BRM Brownbag. We want to inspire more BRMs to take pride in what they do and make the world a better place to win. So, as we celebrate Single Global BRM Community, we encourage you to participate as part of the BRM community of interest. Help yourself, help your organizations, and make sure that a single person can make a difference. So, I look forward to staying in touch, Tommy, and thank you so much for spending valuable time this week. And I can't wait to see the magic you can create, not only in your organization, but also across the community. Thank you so much for your time once again.
You're welcome. I'm really excited to do so. And thanks again for having me.
Sure.